If you're eating, enjoy your meal. I wish you a good day, that everything goes well, and enjoy the video. Get comfortable and pay attention to this story.
Okay, so in this explainer, we're going to look at a teenager from Brooklyn who didn't just casually enter the music industry. No, he completely crashed into it like a meteor. And in the process, he totally transformed the global sound of hip hop. This is the incredibly tragic but truly unforgettable story of Bashar Barakah Jackson. Of course, the world knows him best as Pop Smoke, the undisputed king of Brooklyn drill. 14 months. That's it. That is the staggeringly brief window of time it took for Pop Smoke to go from being a complete unknown to an absolute global icon. You know, in the music industry, 14 months is usually just the amount of time it takes a label to plan a standard album rollout, but for Pop Smoke, that was his entire meteoric rise. It honestly challenges everything we know about how fast cultural shifts can actually happen. So it really makes you wonder, how did a teenager from Brooklyn actually pull this off? I mean, how did someone so young, with literally so little time, manage to build a musical legacy that outlasts artists who have been in the game for decades? Well, to really grasp the magnitude of what Bashar accomplished, we have to trace his steps right back to the neighborhood that made him. The Occidental studio session, and his journey from Canarsie to the booth. Bashar grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, where the intense pull of street life eventually derailed his childhood basketball dreams and actually led to a stint under house arrest. You know what's crazy, though? The ultimate irony of his whole origin story is that Pop Smoke never even intended to be a rapper. His entire career started by total, absolute accident. Flashback to late 2018. He was just hanging out in a Brooklyn recording studio with a local artist named Jay Guapo. Well, Guapo ended up passing out intoxicated, so young Bashar, who was just buzzing with this relentless energy, decided to step in the recording booth simply to mess around, literally just for fun. And that moment in the booth, that was the exact spark. He hops on YouTube, does some searching, and stumbles across this insanely heavy, dark beat by a British producer who goes by 808 Mellow. He pulls it up, steps up to the mic, and records a track called MPOA. He absolutely wasn't trying to invent a new genre, but right there in that spontaneous moment, a brand new global sound was instantly born. The birth of Brooklyn drill and the forging of a transatlantic sound, because Pop Smoke knew immediately that he had caught lightning in a bottle. Recognizing the magic of that session, he flew 808 Mellow all the way from London to New York so they could lock in and work together in person. The secret sauce of this revolutionary sound was just a brilliant fusion of two different worlds. On one hand, you had the UK drill elements that 808 Mellow brought to the table. We're talking these incredibly dark, menacing, sliding bass lines. And then, on the other hand, you had Brooklyn. The aggressive, raw street energy paired perfectly with Pop Smoke's incredibly deep, raspy baritone voice. It was a transatlantic mashup that sounded like absolutely nothing else on the radio at the time. But see, he wasn't just bringing a new sound to the table. He was bringing an entire aesthetic, the woo movement. Pop Smoke was just a natural superstar. He had this magnetic charisma that you honestly cannot teach. It was defined by that booming voice, his signature ad-libs, the iconic cornrows, and his incredibly infectious dancing. The second he said woo, he captured the heart of New York City, and the whole culture just moved right along with him, exploding into the mainstream and a devastating peak. Because once the sound and the movement were locked in, his rise from an underground viral sensation to a globally recognized phenomenon happened at absolute hyperspeed. The sheer velocity of his career was just unprecedented. Think about this timeline. In April 2019, he unleashes Welcome to the Party. It becomes the ultimate summer anthem, drawing official remixes from rap royalty like Nicki Minaj and Skepta. Then, by late 2019, megastar Travis Scott taps him for the hit track Gaddy, which completely thrusts the Brooklyn drill sound onto the global mainstream stage. Fast forward to February 2020, and his project Meet the Woo 2 drops, debuting in the top 7 on the Billboard 200 with massive tracks like Dior. Brooklyn drill wasn't just an underground subgenre anymore, it was dominating the world. But then, catastrophe. Just days later, on February 19, 2020, while staying at a rented home in the Hollywood Hills, 4 masked intruders broke in. Pop Smoke was fatally shot during the home invasion. He was only 20 years old. The music world was just entirely shattered. It's a really somber reality to pause on, isn't it? Tributes poured in from every single corner of the globe. Fans, producers, and fellow artists mourned the loss of a generational talent who was taken exactly at the moment he reached the absolute peak of his momentum. It wasn't just a massive loss for Brooklyn. It was a devastating blow to the future of music itself. An everlasting legacy and posthumous triumph, because the story doesn't actually end in tragedy. Hip-hop legend 50 Cent, who is actually a major idol of Pop Smoke's, stepped in to executive produce his unfinished debut album and share it with the world. And that brings us to July 2020, barely 5 months after his passing, with the release of Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon. Let me tell you, this album was a total revelation. It didn't just give fans more of those heavy drill tracks that they already loved, it showcased Pop Smoke's undeniable versatility. He flawlessly blended his gritty street sound with these really melodic R&B hits, like What You Know About Love and For the Night. To really understand his impact, we have to look at the commercial power of this posthumous release, because the numbers are absolutely staggering. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. Astonishingly, all 20 tracks from the album charted on the Billboard Hot 100 simultaneously. It went multi-platinum, spawned global chart toppers, and it literally broke the all-time record for the most weeks spent at #1 on the Billboard Top Rap Albums chart. These aren't just good numbers. These are historic, record-breaking achievements for sure. And honestly, the accolades just kept pouring in, proving once and for all that he was way more than just a fleeting viral hit. His iconic anthem Dior earned a Grammy nomination. Then, in 2021, a second posthumous album called Faith was released, once again honoring the kid from Canarsie. Today, his influence is completely permanent. You can see it everywhere, in global fashion, in viral dance trends, and baked right into the fundamental DNA of modern hip-hop production. Bashar Jackson's life was terribly, terribly brief, but his impact, it's immortal. And it's perfectly captured in his own words, shoot for the stars, aim for the moon. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If a 14-month meteor strike, sparked by a totally accidental studio session, could leave such a beautiful and permanent crater in music history, what does that actually say about the sheer, undeniable power of raw human potential?